Jesus took 12 teenagers and turned them into 12 disciples and apostles that changed the world. Now, today, we're afraid to send our teenagers to public school. Just think about that for a second.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. My name is Ethan.
And my name is Derry. And today we've got a really cool guest. His name is The Bearded Disciple on all social media platforms. He's on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. He's got his own podcast. Super cool guy. I've loved his content. Me and Ethan have both loved his content for a while. And today he's coming on the show to talk to us about discipleship, how the church has done discipleship, if we failed, how we can do better, stuff like that. To let you know a little bit more about his content, he does a lot of apologetics focused content. Really awesome. We've seen some really great stuff about Mormonism, apologetics in general, a lot of different worldview stuff. We've really enjoyed it. Go check him out on all of those different social media platforms. Again, his name is Bearded Disciple or The Bearded Disciple. Pretty easy to find. His little emblem is just like a bearded disciple, bald guy. Pretty hard to miss. He's awesome. At this point, we're just trying to get a lot of carbon copies of Ethan and try to have all of the different bearded bald guys on our podcast. It's been a good time, and so I'm sure we're gonna have an awesome discussion today. He's also been a Bible teacher in the past, and he still is now. But he currently works for an apologetic campus ministry called Ratio Christi, if I said that right. I'm not sure, in Colorado. He's also been a part of World Race, so he's got some cool credentials, and I'm sure a lot of varied experience. And yeah, we're excited to talk to him. How you doing?
Doing great.
I do a good job. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I guess one thing I failed to mention was, as far as my even training, I went to a 1-year Bible school in England with a program called Torchbearers.
I know Torchbearers. Yeah.
Fantastic program for a gap year. I'm actually looking to get involved with the one. There's another Torchbearers not far from me, called Raven Crest that I'm hoping to get involved with here. And then I went to seminary school and got a degree in apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary.
Cool.
Even my undergrad at Colorado State was philosophy with a concentration on religion. So I've kind of just been in this world, whether it's through secular means or through Christian means, for a while now.
That's awesome.
Very nice.
Cool.
Very nice.
That's a great school. We love it.
Yeah.
What was your journey into apologetics and philosophy? Like, was there a crisis when you were younger of faith, or was there a question that was too hard to answer? Because I know for a lot of people who get into that, it's usually a problem they come across that they end up solving, and then from there they just stay there and continue to answer questions.
Right. Yeah, so that was something that I think my parents did a really great job. Is I learned a lot of that sort of stuff from them growing up. And it's an interesting thing to even kind of look at with my own parents, as opposed to even some of my friends that their own parents did a good job raising them, but didn't necessarily ground them in theology or apologetics as much. And seeing some of them walk away from the faith. So I don't think I ever really had a time that I was really questioning Christianity. Not that I didn't have my questions. I still have my questions. But I had enough answers that it never allowed me to like completely walk away, even in the hard times of like, I think that sustained me in a lot of times when I've just not felt like I've experienced the presence of the Lord, or hard things are happening. And I've been able to just kind of look at it and say, I don't know where God's at right now, but I know that I've seen enough evidence to know that he exists and he's true.
You lean back on that foundation, right?
Yeah. Yep. And part of that, one other thing that I've gone through is Summit Ministries. So Summit Ministries is this like 2-week long camp down in Colorado Springs, that essentially they bring some of the best Christian apologists in the country, and it's for students that are in graduating high school or in their early years of college to really get a great apologetics foundation. And that was the start of apologetics for me. My interest in doing it was a bit of seeing my friends walking away from the faith and hearing their objections and kind of being like, I don't think those are as strong objections as you think that they are.
Right.
Or even having my non-Christian friends say, I think you're crazy to believe in God because of this, and being like, I think there's actually good answers to those questions. They're good questions, but there's better answers to those than you're giving credit. And realizing that I had something to offer to people in that really got me excited. and I started just realize I love teaching, and so that's where
Yeah.
it kind of going.
Wait,
I
what
can
was
share
that?
that passion a lot. Sorry,
Yeah.
Ethan.
I was gonna say, what was that university that university ministry that you were just talking about called? I wanted to write it down so I could. My friend's a
So
youth
the
pastor, so I think it'd be valuable for him.
Yeah, so the ministry it's a summer camp essentially. I don't know. Camp isn't a good way of putting it either because it's so much you're drinking from a fire hydrant. There's
Mm.
so much information that you're getting.
Is it like a seminar almost?
Yeah, in some ways it's like a 2-week seminar. So it's called Summit Ministries.
Okay.
They're mainly based in Springs, but then they also have one that I think now is just like a couple sessions that they do in Georgia right now, and they're looking to expand. We're actually, so the ministry that I work for, Ratio Christi, as a campus ministry, we're actually growing more in a partnership with them right now. And I'm part of building that because it's kind of like when our students finish the end of the year and we're kind of winding down because we're a campus ministry, they're just gearing up to start to get students to come during the summer. And so our students that are student leaders are perfect to have as their kind of camp counselors. And then their camp counselors are the perfect people that we need for officers of our clubs. So it's a cool hand in hand thing that can work together there.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a really valuable, really valuable ministry and thing to go through because as we're talking about today, which I think Derry mentioned, we're going to be discussing the how we've not done a great job of discipling our young people, college age or high school and younger. And then when they do leave the church to maybe go to college or they leave home to go to college, a lot of them end up falling away. I feel like that more of those ministries are almost needed so we can prevent that, and give people serious training. And so I think this is a good transition into that whole conversation of like, yeah, we don't do a great job of discipling our young people and giving them the things they need so when they leave the church that they're able to keep their head on their shoulders and handle all those questions. So yeah, any thoughts on that you have been thinking about that you want to share?
Yeah. This has been something that's been a lot, I think, on my mind, especially it's not only discipleship, but even like how we need to do church differently in a sense, or at least focus a bit differently in the way that we do church discipleship as a whole, I would say. And some of that is spurred, I think, from over COVID, just starting to rethink my own experience with church and kind of had a whole nother story, but kind of had a rough time with church over COVID myself. And in the end ended up somewhere else afterwards. But it made me really think of like, why am I here? What is the point of doing this whole church thing? In a lot of ways, it was realizing where I was at. I wasn't able to really use my gifts and my talents to serve. And like, I think one of the things that people in general look at church wrong is they look at church as a hotel of like, I come, I get my service, I leave my towel on the floor and let room service take care of me. But if it's a church, if this is your home, then it's your home. And if your home, the door is broken, you fix it yourself. You don't expect room service to pick the towel off the floor. You clean up yourself. And so when something is wrong with your church, you need to come in there to try to be the help to fix that. And that's not always something that maybe you have the gift and the ability to, but I think a lot of times when you realize that something's not perfect with your church, and there will be because it's full of no church is but when you find something that, hey, I think we could do this differently, it's probably because you have the gift and the ability to see something that maybe other people aren't seeing, and you come in there to help fix it. And so my journey was realizing I was at a place that like I saw some ways that things needed to change, but I wasn't really given the ability to really do so. And some of that ends up being in apologetic stuff, but even what I wanted to almost focus on was less in apologetics as just discipleship in general of like, if we asked the general student or just member of a church, what is the gospel? Could they explain that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly, like, I wouldn't put a huge number on that. or even something that I look at, like looking at the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed.
Right.
I think that explains the very basic bare bones of the Christian faith.
Mm.
But if I asked a random member of a church, hey, what is the Apostles' Creed? Or even if I read it to them and said, could you explain to me what that is and what that's
Right.
saying? Could they do that? Probably
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
That's something that needs to change. You know, in some ways, it's like, I think, and this is partly coming from a model that in some ways I think is developed out of Billy Graham,
Hmm.
of we're looking to bring converts. Well, that's not what we're called to do. We weren't called to make converts, we're called to make disciples.
Right.
Those are two very different goals. And the church has been too focused on making disciples and then making a small group that you can feel at home in. And that's about as far as church goes.
Mm.
But I can convert and I can join an atheist church and feel at home. Like finding a place that you feel comfortable and at home, that's not, the church isn't offering anything there that can't be found somewhere else as far as
Mhm.
finding that. Granted, the church should be better at that than anything else is, but we should be doing so much more than that. And so even to bounce it to you guys, here's a question: is what would you say a healthy disciple looks like? What are like the habits that they're doing? What is their thinking? What does a healthy disciple look like? How would you explain that? Just pop into your head what the things come to your mind.
Right. Derry, you want to start off?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what stage of life you're in and like what kind of community you live in, because it's gonna be different for everybody depending on that. Like a lot of people, especially in the West, don't live in a very community centric place, and so discipleship is almost impossible because they're not seeing someone consistently that's like if you're a disciple of someone, you're walking, in my mind, you're walking with them consistently and learning from them as they teach you, like the rabbi, like Jesus was a rabbi, right?
Mhm.
And he would have his disciples. And so I think for a lot of people, like your question is what is discipleship? I think it can easily be conflated with mentorship a little bit, but you just have someone who's walking alongside you and teaching you about, in our case, the gospel, the Bible, how to be a Christian, how to live this life. And as the person who's being discipled goes across, just has life happens, goes across different instances of this happens, that happens, or growing or learning, they're being discipled through all of these things to look more like Christ. And that, I think that changes very much depending on what circumstance each person is in, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Go ahead.
Ethan.
Okay, I was just gonna say, what Derry was saying about, like, as a disciple, you walk with a person. That's very true to the idea of a disciple. Like,
Right.
the closest thing that we would have in our culture would be like an apprenticeship. Where you are going to study under this journeyman who's going to teach you, and you're gonna pretty much copy everything he's doing to do it that way. And in the Jewish community back when Jesus was around, discipleship went so far as if your rabbi was left-handed, you would try to do everything left-handed. You'd kind of retrain your mind. And it really, I think, like what Derry's kind of getting at is saying, like, it looks different in different times of your life is true, because I think no matter what, you're following certain guidelines that are laid out in the Bible, and that looks different at certain times, right? So Jesus says, if you love me, obey my commandments. And one of his commandments is to deny yourself and pick up your cross daily. And that looks like different things in different seasons. Sometimes it looks like a lot of evangelism, maybe. Sometimes it looks like a lot of humanitarian service that the Lord calls you to. But the mindset is, okay, I don't belong to myself. I belong to Jesus. I love Jesus. I'm going to do my best to learn from Jesus. And that then requires a normal habit of Bible reading, prayer, and worship. But yeah, just that template of like worship, prayer, Bible reading, and if you're and loving God with your heart, right? And if you are staying there, you will just naturally do the things that Christians do over time, and you'll get better at it. Like, you might not evangelize now, but you might do the other things, and eventually you'll step into evangelism, and in a couple years, you'll be better at evangelism than you are now. But yeah, it just looks like loving God and obeying Him, I would say.
Right. Yeah. So this is where to me, I think there's a little bit of like, you can't reap seeds that you haven't been sowing.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
like one of the things that I think a good disciple is someone who is spending time in the word, who is learning how to glean from that. But how often is a church teaching people, here's how to read your Bible and understand the context of it. Here's how to
Right.
understand basic hermeneutics to make sure that you're reading your Bible properly. Hey, a good disciple at the right season of life, because I agree with you, there is a time and a season at times with different things in this, but like things that I look at of that we should all be reaching towards, and don't get legalistic about it, because otherwise you've missed the gospel and its holiest if you become legalistic about these things. But like,
Mhm.
I should be trying to do regular evangelism. I should be trying to take care of the poor and the needy. I should be fasting. I should be reading the word. These are all things to learn. I should know basic Christian doctrine. I should be able to defend basic Christian doctrine. And we're kind of, I think oftentimes as church, just saying, well, if you get plugged in with a small group and you experience fellowship, it doesn't really matter what that small group is doing. Eventually you're going to learn doctrine. And I'm like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like, why would you think that they're going to learn good, solid doctrine when they're literally reading the Giver for your small group book?
Right.
You're not. Like, and I wish I could say I was throwing out a weird example, but that's real. Like, that's legitimately, I've
For sure.
heard of church doing that sort of thing as a study. So like, what I've been even thinking, and this is what I've even started to tell pastors that I'm encouraging, like, this is, you need to change your model of doing this, because there is an element of like, all right, small groups, find your place, find your people, get fellowship. That's great. But if we are not looking at it and saying, hey, if you really want to grow in your discipleship and your relationship with the Lord, we have some specific small groups that are going to equip you to do that well, that we're encouraging everybody in our congregation who really wants to become a disciple in Christ to get into and to go through eventually. Almost looking at it like a curriculum of, here's your 101 courses. Like, everyone should go through this. This is just how to read your Bible, and we're going to teach you that. Here's a class that's just the basic Christian doctrine, and we have that class. And here's one on just how to do evangelism, and you're going to go out and you're going to do evangelism, because let's be honest, like, I don't think I've known of, there's maybe one or two people that I've ever known who are just like, yeah, I never had done evangelism, I'd never gone out with anybody, and I just started doing it because I'm part of a small group.
Like almost nobody. Yeah.
No, that's not going to happen, because it's terrifying the first time you're there. But if you have someone, and this is mentoring is another thing, you guys definitely hit on that. Like, mentoring, churches, I think, are always trying to make that happen. Unfortunately, there's a level of like, how do I get people to buy into this thing? And that's another element that I think churches need to change, is even when they create maybe some of these, we got a class on doctrine, we got a class on whatever, we have a program for mentorship. Well, that really, especially with the way that we're doing church with such a focus on like a head pastor, unless the pastor tells people to show up and say like, hey, I really encourage you and this will be good, instead of just join a small group and not even mention that, hey, I really think particularly you should join the spiritual disciplines small group or the doctrine small group, people are just going to do one that's easy.
Absolutely.
And so like, I've done apologetics small groups all the time, and very, very often it's hard to get a lot of people to show up, or I've even offered, I'll do a class. Well, I'll tell you, night and day, in the church that I've been attending now, very quickly that pastor was like, hey, would you want to do an apologetics class for the church? And this is not a huge church, 400 or 500 people that attend this church. And for 3 weeks leading up to it, they announced it every week. And then the week before, I came up on stage with the pastor and did a little interview, and he told everybody, encouraged everybody to come up. A church of 400 people For 4 weeks doing that apologetics course, we had 100 people show up.
Wow.
And I think that's hugely
That's
because
giant.
the pastor was just like, I think this is things that everyone should be learning and they should be
Uh-huh.
growing in.
Uh-huh.
And we encourage you to be a part of this. So the head pastor, unless he really comes behind it, instead of just saying join a small group, and and I'm not saying that like everyone should be joining the small group that is doing spiritual disciplines and everyone should be a part of the doctrines class, because yes, there's a time and there's a place. But if somebody's coming to church and they're like, I want to grow spiritually, I want to grow in my discipleship,
Mhm.
and all that's being said from the pulpit is join any small group as if all of them are going to equally grow you in discipleship,
Mm.
it's just not true.
Mm.
It's
Right.
just not true. And we need
Yeah,
to
there
stop
needs to
acting.
be and there needs to be training for those small group leaders. You know, I haven't seen too much in terms of small groups in the churches I've attended. When I was younger, there was a church who did it, but I think the process of becoming a small group leader was pretty much if you were willing to host people at your house, they were like, "Oh, cool, you're willing, let's do it." But
Right.
you know, there's a lot of people in the congregation who just because you go to the same church don't believe the same thing. You know, I've had people say things to me at church where I kind of look at them like, "Wait, you believe what?" You know, and I'm like, "Wait, we're in the same church?" You know, and it's just like it's not salvific issues, but they're secondary doctrines. But still, it's like, you know, there needs to be training around those small group leaders and kind of also an emphasis put on like, hey guys, you're a small group leader. This is a big responsibility. This is not like for the faint of heart. This is not light. This needs one commitment and time, but also like commitment to doctrine. Like you are kind of being a mini pastor or a mini like spiritual leader over that person. And so then the church or the head pastor might be even more responsible for who they put in charge of their congregation.
Right. Yeah,
Hmm.
I think you're touching on a huge thing there. Like one pastor that I talked to, and I was asking like, what do you do about the hard issues, like the ones that people are wrestling with, whether it's a doctrinal thing or it's like in the last couple of years people are asking like Black Lives Matter. What do I do with that? What do I do with now like transgender that's becoming a huge issue? Like those tough issues. Where are you thinking that your church is learning that stuff? And his answer was like, well, that sort of stuff I talk about because I want to make sure that it's taken care of right. I'm teaching that. I'm like, okay, where are you teaching that? And he says Sunday. And I'm like, I've been in this church. You're not talking about those things on Sunday.
Mm.
So you need to have something. And it's, and I would say with some of those tricky, more personal issues,
Mm.
I don't necessarily think that should be done in the pulpit on Sunday morning. But if you're declaring that that's when people are learning that sort of thing, then you
Mhm.
better be doing it then,
Hmm.
because they're going to be learning it elsewhere from people that you haven't equipped. And
Hmm.
what you're talking about of, let's be honest, in some ways like this, I think again, the way that our churches have been so focused on a head pastor or even
Mhm.
the pastors as the pastor, even in a smaller church, if somebody doesn't really have a personal relationship beyond like a church that's like 200 people,
Mhm.
if somebody comes to that church and they have a question, they're not going to the pastor, they're
Mhm.
going to the small group leader. And so if they have a question doctrinally, or if they have a question about one of those issues that's happening these days that we're kind of all trying to navigate what's the Christian answer to, and your pastor or the other staff haven't trained your small group leaders to answer those questions, what are you doing? Because you have no idea what answers they're going to be giving to those questions. You don't know if they're equipped. The pastors in your church are not the people that are preaching on Sunday. They're not. Those aren't your pastors. Your pastors are your small group leaders.
Yeah.
And so if you're not equipping and training them, then why would you think that you're going to reap seeds of people that know doctrine well? Because your pastors don't know doctrine well. You haven't taught them.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
another element of that is you probably need to put a requirement on being a small group leader.
Mm.
And we need to also then do more to equip those small group leaders, because I've also had at times where I feel like what I hear from a church is, well, we don't want to put the bar too high. We want to get as many people involved. And again, that's getting focused on making converts or getting members, but it's not getting disciples. It's
Yeah.
getting more butts in the pews. That's all it's doing. And your goal isn't to have more people attend your church and feel like I have a small group that I feel at home at. Again, they can find an atheist church. That's a thing that they can
Mhm.
feel at home at. So what are you doing? And I don't think it's as hard as often we make it sound of like, well, then I have to teach all my small group leaders basic Christian doctrine. Okay, so once a month you tell them to come for an hour and do a teaching on that,
Mm.
on
Mhm.
one doctrinal issue. They'll
Yeah.
get there. They don't
Yeah.
have to get a seminary level education,
Mhm.
but some basic doctrine. I could explain the Trinity. I was a Bible teacher.
Right.
I taught the Trinity to 7th grade students
Mhm.
in one class. And that's not an easy subject,
No.
but they could explain that well enough to avoid what are typical heretical ideas regarding the Trinity
Mhm.
Good.
in an hour. If I can teach 7th graders how to explain the Trinity in an hour, I can teach small group leaders the same thing in an hour. And for you to say, hey, this is a big deal, like you're saying, the commitment to being a small group leader is big. And expressing, hey, if you want to be a small group leader, that means you're a pastor. And if and in that, then it means you need to be willing to take some extra time to get trained. And if you're not willing to do that, then sorry, we're not going to put you as a small group leader.
Mm.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's
very
really
interesting.
good because like this is why I have a couple friends who are also in ministry that I've been hanging out with here. And I was even at coffee talking today with one of them, and I was just sharing, like, man, I feel like a lot of times in like how I grew up in youth group or even some churches now, and not even outside of youth group, in the main churches, they might say, like, oh, we don't want to touch on this or we don't want to talk about that. And specifically when it comes to kids' church or youth group, it's like, well, they're not ready for that. They're too young to handle that. And we don't want to discuss that because it's like mature content. We don't know if we want to do that. And I just think, do you think like TikTok is letting up on what they're teaching your kids because the kids can't handle
Yeah.
it? Do you think like they're teaching CTR or CRT in public schools, and
Right.
and they're not letting up. So it's kind of like, well, if like the camp of the enemy, quote unquote, is pushing this heavy, why are we not also? Like, that's not how you win a war. If an army brings 10,000 troops in, you only bring 2,000 because you're like worried that 8,000 aren't ready for it. It's like, well, if you're ready for it or not, it's at the door. You got to do something about it, and you don't win by giving less, you know. And so I've kind of been like thinking for myself and also trying to encourage people I'm talking to, like, we have to like push harder. And that doesn't mean getting angry and shaming people who disagree. That doesn't mean like totally rejecting people who and like, yeah, like lashing out on people who disagree. It just means like, hey, these are things that are being taught. Here's what the world is saying. Here's the biblical response. Make sure you're still loving them when you're talking to them.
Right.
Hmm.
But I mean, even that's another thing to train people in. Like
Mhm.
and that's something that's lost in our culture today is like, how do I have a meaningful conversation and a loving manner with somebody that disagrees with me?
Hmm. Hmm.
We can teach them that. Like there's a whole the book that I probably recommend to people more than any other book out there is a book called Tactics by Grace.
I knew it.
Hey, I have all our
Like-
students read that in the school I run.
Good. Yeah, that's awesome. Wait, I'm just realizing you guys said you're with YWAM.
Yeah.
You guys know Josh Miller?
Sounds really familiar.
Because
I don't.
he just last year he did a apologetics thing with YWAM and brought a team out here to Colorado State.
Oh,
I
cool.
thought,
Was he out of Kona, Hawaii?
yeah,
We probably know the same people then, because I have a friend who did the apologetics school as well.
got it. Yeah. So yeah, and it's just like teaching people that. I was talking with a student today. So we've been doing a lot of boothing for our campus ministry. It's the start of the school year and everything. And like one of the things is teaching people, one of the sayings is Ratio Christi that we say all the time is we're not here to win arguments, we're here to win souls, which is lost. Like, and it's and it's hard a lot of times, especially when somebody does know apologetics well, like, and I've fallen in it myself at times, that like you do want to win the argument and you look at what they're saying and you're like, this is super stupid what you're saying. And like you just want to just destroy what they're saying, because and
Right.
you feel like you can, and you may
Yeah.
very well be able to, but like, to not look at the person that you're talking with as the enemy. And I even always like show people, like, I can look at it of, I'm trying to argue with you and it's this me versus you thing, or I can stand next to you looking at what we're trying to figure out, and we're trying
Mhm.
to figure this out together.
Hmm.
That's
And
a
that
great
shows,
that's a great perspective.
yeah. And if you can do that in conversation and show people like, hey, I'm willing to, like, I could be wrong about this. I'm
Mm.
not convinced I am. If you have some evidence otherwise, then all of a sudden it's, you're willing to like show them interested. Or another big thing that I think is huge in conversation with people is, as much as possible, when you find common ground with someone,
Mm.
acknowledge that. You know, the organization that I have gotten the best training about talking about abortion, which is probably the most heated subject ever. Like,
Right.
you can say one wrong thing and the conversation's just done, and
Yeah, it's
somebody will
over.
Mhm.
and but I've gone to these fantastic trainings with one organization, and like, it seems like all the time they're just like, common ground, common ground, common ground. Do you agree with them on this? Do you agree with them on that? Acknowledge that, verbalize that, say that to them. Don't just realize, yeah, actually some of what you're saying I agree with. Say that you agree with them on those things. People are going to be more willing to hear what you have to say in that.
Mm.
But all of that sort of dialogue, that sort of thing, learning how to have disagreements with someone in a mature way, that's another thing the church should be equipping people in.
Mm. Yeah.
But we're not.
When it comes to discipleship, I think there's a really interesting aspect of it where I think there are certain different kinds of churches or church styles that may be more conducive to like good discipleship than other kinds of churches. You've got, like, I'm not saying like ranked best to worst or anything. I'm just saying there's a whole bunch of different kinds of churches, like those seeker-friendly churches. Even between different denominations, you have different levels of involvement of people using their gifts and stuff
Right.
like that, right? So do you think that there is a model of church that's more conducive to people being able to be discipled? And you kind of have these different levels of discipleship too that we were talking
Right.
about, where like, and in a way you can be discipled from the pulpit, and then there's also all these like little pastors that are in small groups that are discipling people, and there's like the one-on-one mentorship kind of discipleship. Do you think that there's a conducive way for a church to do discipleship based off of their model of church? There's a better one or a worse one? Do you have any ideas, any thoughts about that?
I don't know, like,
I know it's contentious.
yeah, it's there's a lot to play into that. I tend to like, you know, it's an interesting thing. I've been growing up very much in seeker friendly churches.
Mhm.
I don't really have any problem with that, but I think
Yeah.
what I get frustrated, what I've just kind of almost snapped with, because in a lot of ways, over this experience of like changing churches, was almost probably the, you know, as you guys asked if I ever had like a big crisis of faith, I would say that has been the closest that I've had to a crisis of faith.
Mhm.
Leaving the church that I was at, realizing I wasn't able to do the discipleship that I wanted to, that I was seeing. Here's
Mhm.
this seeker friendly church. Again, no problem with that.
Right.
Real discipleship really isn't happening here.
Mhm.
And I'm not able to come in to help fix that. And so to me, it's more of just like, I don't think necessarily, I would say, especially when it comes to those hot topics, I would advise that should happen from the pulpit on a Sunday. I
Hmm.
think those conversations are just too personal to not be hashed out in a more personal setting.
Hmm.
And so in that, what should be happening is training people to have those conversations that are the small group leaders or whatever, or anybody that's willing, but at least at the minimum, you're saying, if you're a small group leader, you have to come to this training or you're not going to be qualified in our church to be a small group leader. And if
Mhm.
that means you don't have as many small groups, then you don't have as many small groups, because you're going to make sure that people are trained in the areas that they need. So
Hmm.
I think when it comes to the personal things, it should happen there. I think too often, but then there's other things like the Trinity. When's the last time you heard anybody from the pulpit just to give a brief explanation of what we understand the Trinity to be?
Honestly,
Maybe
Just
10 years ago.
I don't know
What?
if I ever have.
Maybe
Right.
10 years ago or something like that.
Like, and I'm
Yeah.
not saying like you even spend 5 minutes, even just saying like we believe in the Trinity. That means that God is 3 persons in one being.
Mhm.
Even
I feel
that.
that sometimes. Well, I go to a
Okay,
good church.
on Sunday, last Sunday, yeah.
Okay. So like, yeah, but like that sort of thing needs to happen more, expand
Yeah.
a little bit more,
Absolutely.
those sort of things, because that's not going to offend anybody for you to explain that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Anything that's not an offensive issue, I think that is something that you could very much give from the pulpit. But when it starts to become anything that could be offensive, that could be personal, then that should be something that should be hashed out more one-on-one. And it should be something that people who are in positions of leadership, anywhere from a small group leader to the head pastor, should be getting some really good training on how to do it.
Do you think that those issues should at least be stated from the pulpit on where the church stands, like by the pastor? Like as a corporate, like, hey, this cultural moment's happening. We just want to give you an understanding and overview of where we're at, and your small group leaders are going to be talking about that this week more in detail. But just from a 30,000-foot view, this is what we believe about it.
I think I tend to lean, and I'm not 100% of where I stand with that. I think I tend to lean, gosh, this is tough. There, in some ways, I tend to lean towards, if it's not a salvation issue, then the first thing I want to do is get people to accept Christ, and then dealing with whether or not you agree with our position on homosexuality or abortion is something that we can hash out after you've accepted Christ.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair.
But there is an element of like, when there's a time that like you need to be calling the church to action over something, that I think we do need to say something. So there's a level of like, let's talk about abortion when you're in a state that is about to have a vote on whether or not to legalize abortion or to make it illegal. There's some element that like, I think the church, because the best thing in some ways, what it is we're always doing what is the most loving thing for as many people as possible. And I know in some ways that sounds somewhat hedonistic, but it's like, okay, I realize that by a church deciding to talk about abortion when there's about to be a vote about it, there might be somebody in the congregation that is offended and hurt by that. And I don't want that. I want to be able to talk to that person, to empathize with them, to find a common ground with them. But at the same time, there's lives at stake in this situation. And if some of my congregation voting against something or voting for something is going to save lives, that's more important saving lives than someone being hurt in that moment. And so it's hard, I think, for me to give a hard and fast, only talk about doctrinal issues that won't offend anybody, period, from the pulpit. I think you have to think it through and kind of work those things out a little bit more.
I totally get where you're coming from, though, where you want to have that personal conversation with someone. So addressing those topics in a smaller group or even one-on-one can deal with all the interpersonal, like, here's why we believe this, what do you think about that kind of conversations, whereas someone could just be offended or disagree with you from the pulpit and then never talk to anyone about it and never come back or something like that. I totally get where you're coming from.
And I think that's some of the reason for the training, though, too, is like, let's say it is one of those situations where I would say it is right for them to talk a little bit about it from the pulpit, for a church to be able to say, and we want to talk to you about this because we understand this is not completely black and white. But we would like to, if this has hurt you, what we've just shared, if you disagree with us in what we've just shared, let's talk. We want to listen first to what you have to say. And we want to be willing to, that's where again, like emphasizing the I'm side by side with you rather than against you. We want to hear what you have to say, and if we're wrong in some of the ways that we're talking about this, we want to be open to that, but we feel strongly that this is the biblical view on this issue.
That's great. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Cool. I think there's another interesting aspect of discipleship where we kind of exist in a realm of like, we have a lot of friends who are pastors, we have a lot of friends that are not pastors and go to church, and we have a lot of people that are friends that are just kind of in between kind of parachurch ministries kind of place. And I hear both sides of discipleship from a lot of people. One side will be people being like, where's like this person that can disciple me? Like, I want to be discipled, I want to be mentored. Like, my church, I feel like, isn't doing a good job. Like, how do I find good discipleship? And then I also hear from pastors on the other side of like, where are the people I want to discipleship? Like, I want to disciple. Like, no one wants to be discipled. Like, no one's coming to this group I'm doing, or no one wants to be individually discipled. And I feel like there's some kind of disconnect there. One question, I guess, talking about a two-part question. One, which side needs to be doing the pursuing more often? Do you think is the individual that should be doing the pursuing to get discipled, or the church pursuing the people to disciple them? I think that's interesting. And then how do we kind of go about bridging that gap, I guess? And I know it's such a multifaceted, complicated question, but do you have an idea?
No, that's a fantastic question. I think, in some ways, like the mentoring thing is an interesting part, like, because I do think that's a key to discipleship, but at the same time, like, part of what you're doing in discipling someone is trying to get it to a point that they're not dependent on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, so oddly enough, like, part of what you're doing as discipling someone is getting them to the point that they don't need you to spoon feed them learning scripture or whatever else. They're
at least at a really basic level, right?
Right. As far as who needs to do the pursuing, it has to be both in a sense. Like, I don't know if you can really say which one's more important, because there's level of like, and I've seen that in the sense of when I've done, a small group, I try to do a small group on like, I'm going to do a basic doctrine small group at a big church. This is a church that's like 6,000 people.
Wow.
And I had 3 people show up.
Well,
so very different than this other church that I was just telling you about doing an apologetics thing, and literally a fourth of the congregation showed up. Like, complete opposite.
Yeah.
So there's a level of like, it takes people being interested, because I can't force people to listen. They have to be willing to actually see that. And that's part of, I was talking with you guys before we started the program of like, we did a talk for Ratio Christi yesterday, and it was getting people to realize you should want Christianity to be true. And that part of the purpose of that is moving people. So many people are in an apathy now. So many people is just like, I don't really care.
Right.
And so how do we get people to realize like, hey, whether Jesus is a Trinity or not is actually a big deal. Like, it changes how you live your life.
Right.
Enough that like, you should be able to understand this and defend it. And a lot of this, one thing that I've realized more and more is, especially when it comes to apologetics, and it's hard not to start doing apologetics and also start getting into doctrine.
Almost impossible.
But on a similar route, like, if you're doing apologetics, you're going to do doctrine.
Right.
If you're doing evangelism, you're going to do apologetics. The reason why people aren't doing doctrine or apologetics is because they're not doing evangelism. They're not actually going and they're trying to reach their neighbors for Christ. People aren't going and having conversations. Too many people are taking that wrongly attributed quote of Francis of Assisi saying, share the gospel and when necessary, use words. He never said that, but everyone says that he did. That quote's horrible.
Right.
Because let's be honest, when was the last time you had somebody that you asked, hey, so how did you come to the Lord? Well, I came to the Lord because I had a neighbor that mowed my lawn in the summer and shoveled my driveway in the winter. They don't. Because sooner or later, at the very least, even in that situation, someone has to ask you at the
Right.
very least, why are you like this?
Mhm.
Why are you different? So when is the gospel? When is it necessary you use words to share the gospel? Every single
Every
freaking
time. Yeah.
there isn't a
Yeah.
time that it's not necessary. And so, and then, well, then what's the gospel? Well, now guess what you're doing? You're doing doctrine.
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
or I like to laugh of like one thing that I saw one of my coworkers post just today, I think it even was like when somebody just says, I don't need all this theology stuff. I think I just need Jesus. Ask them who Jesus is. And
Yeah.
as soon as they start giving you an answer, then you tell them, now you're doing
You're
theology.
doing doctrine.
Yeah. Yep.
Like
Yeah.
you can't, it's unavoidable. But the reason why people aren't doing that is because frankly, they're not doing evangelism. They're not reaching out to people. They haven't bought in. They maybe haven't bought in themselves to this whole Christian thing
Mhm.
is wholly unique and necessary and more important and better than anything else has to offer.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah,
if
I
you
think.
have, then
Okay.
share that.
Well, it's interesting too because you said if you're doing evangelism, you're going to use doctrine and apologetics, and then if you happen
Right.
to use apologetics, you're going to be doing doctrine. And if you're doing apologetics, you're probably evangelizing. And you said part of the reason people don't do apologetics is because they don't evangelize. I would wonder also because I know my experience with evangelism was I I kind of did it here and there at my work environment before I joined full time ministry. Like I would just talk to coworkers, and because I was a Christian and they would just ask about my life, I'd just be like, "Oh yeah, it's just part of what I do," And I had a lot of
Right.
good conversations. But I didn't go out and like try to talk to people. One, because I didn't realize people did that. Like I grew up in more of a prosperity word of faith type thing, so I didn't know like going out and like, I didn't know about the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed until I was in like my 20s, and I was like, "This is a thing we have. This is awesome. Why was I never told that?"
Right.
But once
Super
I
sad, super typical.
yeah. But once I learned what apologetics was, and once I learned how to do evangelism, I got way more confident in my evangelism and excited when
Right.
I learned about apologetics and was trained in apologetics. So I think part of the reason that people don't evangelize, one outside of it being scary and uncomfortable, is it's scary and uncomfortable because people don't have confidence. They don't have confidence because they don't have knowledge. Like anything
Right.
is scary if you don't know how to do it. Like I have a
Yeah.
welding background. When I didn't know how to weld, welding was scary. I didn't know anything about it. All those machines, the
Right.
heavy metal, it's hot. But once you learn, you're like, oh, this is hot glue gun. This is anyone can do this. This is easy. And
Right.
so it's that same idea where people will be more confident and thus hopefully do it when they're properly trained in apologetics and doctrine.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that because I think it's pretty rare that you meet the guy who comes to the Lord and gets super excited and just starts going out and doing evangelism and barely knows any apologetics or doctrine because they're just like, I'm so stoked I want to share. There's those
Right.
people.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people, which surprises most people because I do evangelism probably like, I don't know, 8 to 10 hours a week, every week
Nice.
during school. So like people see me as the guy who's willing to go and talk with anybody and everybody. But even my approach of doing evangelism is kind of an approach that allows people to come and talk to me. I don't necessarily like starting conversations. Once the conversation's going, I'm game.
Right.
But I would have never been that person that was like, let's go out. I'm going to just start a conversation with somebody. I feel equipped once the conversation's going. And so that's why I don't have a fear of it. But you're right. There's absolutely, I think most people, part of the huge fear isn't just, I don't want to talk to a stranger. It's they're going to ask me a question and I'm not going to know the answer. And part of the training, I think, includes a little bit of like saying, hey, don't worry. Like, we think too highly of ourselves, I think, a lot when we go out and do evangelism and think, I'm going to say something wrong and that person's going to go to hell because I said the wrong.
Yeah.
Wow, man, you think way too highly of yourself that like, God's up there and he's like, dang, Ethan, dude, I can't believe he said that to that guy. He totally would have accepted me, but
Yeah.
Ethan said that. and now that
Yeah.
person's not going to heaven. You think way too highly of yourself to think
Right.
that. And to realize it's learning, just like anything else. You go out there, somebody asks you a question you don't know to. You know, it's a great thing to say. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mhm.
not going to lose people's respect by saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's totally a valid answer.
Probably respect you more.
And then, yeah, they'll
Yeah.
like you more. They'll be more interested. In fact, when I was at CSU studying for my undergrad, so I was a philosophy major with the concentration on religion here at a secular school. And I wouldn't say that CSU was not like God's Not Dead, like crazy or after me or whatever. But I had most of my professors were atheists. So when we talk about the arguments for the existence of God, they were better suited to answer that, give the reasons that they didn't believe God existed. Fine. But I found in that class, what was an interesting thing that I learned during those classes was there was times that even though they gave something that was challenging Christianity, a lot of times I replied, and sometimes I didn't. And it wasn't even necessarily because I didn't even have the answer. Sometimes I even felt like I could refute what he just said in a heartbeat, but I didn't say anything. And what was interesting is when I would leave that class, a lot of times then my peers were like, so what are your thoughts? It was almost like I intrigued them more to have my answer because I wasn't so, I just got to answer. I got to rebuttal every single thing that somebody ever says about Christianity. And I'm going to make up something if I don't have an answer. They were more interested in what I had to say then. And so don't be afraid of not saying anything. You don't have to defend Jesus in every sort of situation. He can defend himself. We are called to go and make a defense. That's what we see as the approach to evangelism. You know, one thing that I point out with people is too often, again, to go back to the bad Francis of Assisi quote, like people think it's relationship, build relationship, and then you can share the gospel with people. I don't see that as the biblical way of doing evangelism. If you read Acts and you just highlight every time that it says he reasoned, he debated, he argued, he persuaded, talking about Paul, it seems like his method of evangelism is apologetics. He shares the gospel, and if they disagree with him, then he argues with them lovingly, but he argues with them.
Yeah.
But that's not how the church thinks of evangelism. And so all of that to say, like, then if you're afraid of going out and doing evangelism, just be willing to go out. It's so much about just being willing. And if they ask something you don't know, say you don't know, go home and research it. So that next time somebody asks you that question, or next time you see that person, you now have an answer to that question. And you'll learn the answers to the questions that come up. And when you learn the basics of apologetics, you'll find that like 90% of the people you interact with, that's all they need.
Right.
It's very rare that you get a question that you're like, I've never heard this before.
Right.
You'll get it.
It's always divine hiddenness, the problem of evil.
Right.
Something like that. Like pretty basic.
Right. Yeah. It's usually those things.
Right.
Yeah. And my favorite thing I've learned through doing evangelism and also studying like that one book, Tactics, that we mentioned earlier, right? They talk a lot about asking questions and like, what do you mean by that? Or like, why? Like, just asking questions when people make statements helps you, one, get a better understanding of their worldview. But once you practice this enough, you can ask questions in a way where you'll ask a question, you'll pin their answer up there, because then you ask another question, maybe their answer now doesn't make sense with what they just said. And you can kind of be like, hey man, earlier you said this and now you're saying this. These don't really work together. Like, I'm just confused. Can you explain that? And when you ask questions and take interest in people, naturally people are more excited to talk because people like talking about themselves. Like, it's in our nature to want to talk about ourselves. So if you ask someone something about them and their worldview, and they're like, that you're not being a jerk about it, or they don't feel like they're a project, they actually feel like you see them as an individual, they're more than often going to be willing to answer and continue the conversation. And so if you can just keep that like respect for them going and just continue to ask questions and then share your belief in a non-threatening way of like, oh, that's really interesting. I haven't heard that before, but this is what I think about that subject. And then you ask like, what do you think about that? Then you're able to like share the gospel by asking questions.
Right. Yep.
I think
cool.
we're going to say something, Derek?
I was changing the subject.
Oh, I was just gonna comment. I sometimes do like to do cold opens. Like you said, you don't like to walk up to people and start conversations. I sometimes do if I can find a good one. Like when Derry and I were in California, everyone we would talk to, like, you want to talk about spirituality? 90% of people said yes. And we'd have a great conversation. It was amazing.
Right.
In Michigan,
Right.
no one wants to talk about spirituality. I ask people in Michigan, like, do you want to talk about spirituality? Everyone's like, no. I'm like, okay, that's awkward.
Right.
And so what I like to do in Hawaii sometimes is walk around and tell people like, hey, I want to answer your hardest questions about God. Do you have any? And I just try to like challenge them because they would be like, huh. Now, when I first started doing evangelism, would never have done that. And then now it's been
Yeah.
a couple years.
Yeah.
I don't think I
Terrifying.
have all the answers at all, but now I have the understanding of like you were just talking about where I can say, I don't know. I have the ability or I don't know, confidence to say I don't know. I think that's more a better statement where it's like,
Mm.
that's a good question. I don't know. But kind of giving them a challenge makes them, I feel like, intrigued about it because they're like, oh, now it's a little competition.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
love that. I'm gonna steal that. We might use that as a whiteboard.
Do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I went up to a
That's
whole like
awesome.
group of like a frat one time in Hawaii, and I was like, "What's up, guys? How you doing? What's your hardest questions?" And then they're all pointing at their friend, like, "Oh, you want to talk to him?" And they all like singled out this one guy, and we had a good little conversation.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
We've done like a sign that'll say, give us your hardest question against Christianity or objection against Christianity. And
Mm.
we've had some good discussions with people that way. And
I
so,
bet.
yeah.
Those are great
Cool.
conversations. We live in such like it's kind of cliche to say modern times, but the technological era, right? And things are changing very rapidly.
Right.
Does discipleship need to change along with it? And what part does technology play in how we do discipleship? Because clearly it plays some part in it, right? Because I think lots of people are discipled by your videos, or else you wouldn't call yourself the bearded bull, right? Like it's a lot of the point of like you making that kind of content is to educate people. And I think a lot of people are discipled by online personalities now.
Right.
So what part do you think technology and people like us have to play in the discipleship of people?
Right. I think, that is one of the coolest things about it. I think it's the opportunity that somebody does have of like, I do want to learn doctrine and my church isn't teaching it. So I can jump online and I can find some great teachers about it. That's also the terrifying thing about it. You're also going to find some horrible teachers that sound really great. And so I think that's where it's like we were talking about, TikTok's not waiting for your students to feel comfortable to talk about a certain subject. They're just going to throw it in their face. And so that's why I think we have a responsibility to try to get out there and get content out there and get good content out there. Like that's where, so I reference God's Not Dead. And I get so annoyed when people are like, oh, you're an apologist. You must love God's Not Dead. And I don't know. I almost like want to puke in that moment. I don't know how else to express it. Like that might be, and I even like, here's just a weird random fact about me. If I wasn't in ministry, I think I would have gone into acting. But that's that movie, the acting's so horrible, the plot's so horrible.
Yeah.
The script, everything about it is just horrendous. And
That's
so
a Christian
like
movie.
Yeah.
Classic, yeah.
And even people give it that pass of like, well, it's a Christian movie. Like, I like it because it's a Christian movie. And I'm like, we can do better. And in that same sort of vein, like that's what I want to do. That's what I'm trying to do with my YouTube and other content. Like in a lot of ways, it's funny. I think with my YouTube stuff, especially, I got started because I found a channel that was done by some Mormons that was just really well done. And they're still doing stuff here and there, or quite frequently. And I still like, they're still almost like that standard and bar that I'm trying to reach because they've grown so much now. They've got like a graphics team and all their stuff just looks super professional. And we just need to produce like that. We need to put stuff together that's more like The Chosen. Like, man, that's been a breath of fresh air to have a show that it's like, wow, this is actually really well done. And yes, that means you're going to take some artistic liberties when you're doing something that's reenacting parts of the Bible. That's okay. Like,
Yeah.
if it gets way off doctrinally, then we can have another conversation. But like creating that, I think, is important. But ultimately, the church needs to not rely upon that. The church needs to be doing the responsibility of doing discipleship. The family needs to be doing the responsibility of discipleship. There's also an element that like families have become dependent on youth pastors
Right.
to do the discipleship that they should be doing with their own kids. That needs to change. And you can utilize, when you find that good content, you can utilize some of the best stuff out there. Like, have you guys run across Lutheran Satire at all?
No.
No.
Where are they?
Lutheran Satire is a YouTube channel, and I would argue in some ways I think it's the best Christian apologetics YouTube channel out there
Huh. Okay.
because it is hilarious. Like, when you look at it, you'll, as far as the production value, it's, the graphics are horrendous, but that's almost kind of the gimmick. It's kind of almost got like a South Park thing going in that sort of element.
Cool.
He literally does like clip art that he adds mouths to that are like flash motion to it. And that's how he does it. But like, he's got one video in particular that's bad. It's called Bad Analogies, and it's about the Trinity, and it's basically exposing all the bad analogies that people use for the Trinity. And the whole dialogue is these two Irish guys, Irish peasants, talking with St. Patrick, and they just humorously essentially are mocking St. Patrick as he gives bad analogies for the Trinity. And
That's awesome.
when I was a Bible teacher, I showed this to them, and the humor of it just had the kids rolling. Like, they loved it. And when I came around to doing my test on the Trinity, like, and we were reviewing for it, I would even be like, you know, we were doing a review game, and I'd give an analogy and say, all right, which heresy is this? And the kids literally are just quoting Lutheran Satire
Wow.
back.
Nice.
Cool.
Wow.
That's the sort of thing that we need to be producing. And because in a lot of ways, like, what culture used to be, this is even probably a way to think of it, is culture used to be oral. You know, people in Jesus's time, a 9-year-old had pretty much the Torah memorized. A 9-year-old boy would have the Torah memorized, the first 5 books of the Bible, because that's the culture we're in. Well, now, if I go to a student, they can sing to me something from Frozen, or they can quote a bunch of lines from Nacho Libre or whatever else because it's hilarious and quotable. If we can put doctrine into that sort of thing, that it sticks with them in that way, which is especially that Lutheran Satire video in particular does that stinking well, that like all of a sudden it's going to be memorized because I'm remembering how exactly that Irish peasant explained the false heresy of modalism.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
boom. That's doctrine in a way that people are going to keep it. That's the
Would the
sort of
7th
concept.
graders call it modalism? Like, they would know that term?
So that, I think I showed that to my 7th graders, even though we weren't doing doctrine in that with them.
Okay.
But my 9th grade class was a 9th grade doctrines class, and we talked about the Trinity. And yes, they would say, like, I'll quote the whole thing for you. That's modalism, Patrick. That's a heresy that was proclaimed as a heresy back in 400 AD by the Athanasian Creed. They would quote that back to me.
Wow.
So
Crazy.
not only are they quoting what heresy it is, they're quoting what creed we knew established that it was a heresy and what year it came from because of that video.
That's amazing.
This is why we need to bring back adult Veggie Tales. Have them do this.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what that, I think Lutheran Satire is probably feeling that, because it is more adult humor. You know, it's the sarcasm, it's satire, you know.
Right. That's his most popular video. I'm on his channel right now. It's got almost 2 million views.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
And I'm sure that's because people like me are like showing it to students all the time. You know,
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
I would end a few classes sometimes that would be like, we got 5 minutes left. What do you guys want to do? They're like, let's watch a Lutheran satire. And we'd end class with one of those, you know.
Nice.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
Sweet.
Cool. You have any more questions, Ethan? Or we can go on our last question.
Yeah, let's do the last one.
Cool. So we ask all of our guests on the end of the show this funny little question. And here's the question. If you were in a gladiator arena, like the Christians back in the old days in Rome,
Yeah.
right? And you're locked in there fighting for your life.
Who do you fight?
Against
Which celebrity
predator.
do you kill? Just
No.
kidding.
You're
Yeah, dark really fast.
you're fighting a predator. You get to choose the predator, and you get to choose your melee weapon. What is the largest predator or most dangerous predator you think you could defeat with any melee weapon of your choice, non-futuristic and not like motorized, so like spears, swords, javelins, maces, stuff like that? What do you think is the largest predator you could defend yourself to the death against? So you could get beat up, you could lose a lot of blood, but you're going to be alive. The predator is going to be dead at the end of it. We have gotten a wide array of answers for this, so anything goes.
Got it.
Yeah. And you can take some time. I think Ethan usually says like a dagger and a hyena or something like that.
Yeah,
And
I
then
changed from
go
dagger to
with,
short
like,
sword.
I usually say some kind of like spear kind of thing at a distance, and I go with like a big cat, like a mountain lion or something like that.
Got
Way
it.
too confident.
Yeah. But we've had some people say like bears before.
That was the last
and
person
I
from
forget the weapon
Colorado
they
said
chose.
bears.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it depends on what the type of bear is.
That's true.
He's like, yeah, I can do
I
it.
could take
Yeah.
that.
They chose the biggest bear.
Oh, they're doing like a polar bear? Yeah, you're done with a polar bear. I don't know
No,
what
yeah, you're done.
Yeah.
Well, we've had people choose mice before too. They should have a lot of confidence.
not real confident, huh?
No.
Okay. I feel like I would probably say like a mountain lion.
Nice.
And I'd
Solid.
probably still go with like the short sword, because it's like if I miss with like a long, like I've always been a Braveheart fan, so I want to say like a giant Scottish claymore, but if I miss, it's
Oh, yeah.
over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a short sword, I think, is the better way to go in that sense.
Cool.
So probably something like a mountain lion. Did you guys ever hear the story about the guy out here that choked out a mountain lion?
That
I
just
thought it
makes
was
sense.
fake. Is that real?
It's totally real. Yeah.
No way.
One of my friends, it was her coworker.
Whoa.
A real thing. Granted, so it wasn't a full-grown mountain lion,
Mhm.
and it was also like part of the reason that it probably attacked him is because it was didn't have much food. Like
Mm.
Mm.
animals like that, generally the only time they're going to attack a human is because that's only thing they see available.
Right.
So,
Crazy.
but
Do you
it's
know
weird.
how that person did it? Like how they took him out from like the back or the front?
Well, they got him in the
Um,
guard, and then they put a triangle in there.
So essentially, like he fell. I think when it charged him, he fell on his back, and then he was
Wow.
holding it just with his arms, and then
Wow.
and his arms were long enough that he was able to keep it from being able to scratch him or
Whoa.
like get in his face or whatever. That way. But then when he realized it wasn't going to let up, he's like, I gotta go for the throat and choke it out and kill it. And that's
Whoa.
how he adjusted his grip and got its jugular.
That's
Did
crazy.
he roll over, or did he choke it while it was on top of him?
I'm not sure as far as how that part of it
Man,
went down.
if that happened to me,
Wow.
I'd probably feel pretty unstoppable. I'd be, I choked out a mountain lion. I can do anything.
What's crazy is some people got mad at him and said that like he should have let it kill him.
Crazy.
And those people shouldn't be allowed to vote.
Insanity.
Here's a question you guys could throw out there. One of my friends asked me this recently: is if you were the president, what like 3 things would you declare as like a
Mm,
presidential declaration? Because
right.
one to go to your point of like those people shouldn't be allowed to vote. One of my things is there should be like a common sense law.
Mm.
And so if you just break common sense because you decided to use your mower as a hedge trimmer and messed up your
Right.
hand, like you shouldn't be able to sue Craftsman. I'm sorry, that one's on you. But
Yes,
yeah,
that'd be great. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd probably
Cool.
take government out of school and funding.
yeah.
Everything would be a lot more
Partial to
affordable.
the voucher system as far as that's concerned.
The what system?
The voucher system. So instead of the government telling you where your tax money is going for your taxes, everyone that has a kid is given a voucher that represents a certain amount of money, and then they take that money to whatever school they want to take their kids to.
Oh,
Interesting.
that'd be nice.
I'd make everything open source
Right.
so
So
you get to see where everything's going.
you still get government funding things, so schools aren't like private and crazy expensive,
Mhm.
but then schools get determined based upon what the parents actually want. So you can fund your private Christian school with tax money.
I'd also allow people to choose where the taxes go. You just see
Right.
you'd see what's important to the people and what's not.
Right.
I think the lottery then, because it doesn't isn't lottery funded by a little bit of taxes? Is that correct? Or people buy into it, and
I don't know.
I don't know if it's
I
lottery.
forget how it's funded, but I know the government's somehow part of it.
Yeah, I'm not
But I feel
sure.
like a lot of things would finally get resolved. It'd be like, oh, like we wouldn't have potholes everywhere because they'd be like, oh, my taxes, yeah, I'm going to put them in my city to go here,
Right.
and then everyone who's super compassionate can like put it all the. I feel like it'd do a lot of good, but I'm not I'm not very smart when it comes to politics, just because I haven't studied too much. I haven't.
Right.
There's probably a bunch of reasons why that wouldn't work.
That's another podcast for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right
Absolutely.
on.
We can get the bearded politician on for that one.
Yeah.
All right.
All
Well, it's
right.
been awesome talking to you, man.
sure.
Anytime you want to come back on again, for everybody that's listening, you can find the Bearded Disciple pretty much everywhere: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over those places. He's got great content all over the place. Yeah, we've really enjoyed this podcast. Again, like I said, anytime you want to come back on, we'd love to have you.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. It was good talking with you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Have a good week.